They destroyed Earth's fleet in 1 hour. Then a hidden human ship asked for coordinates. Part 1. The sky above Earth turned red before it turned dark. Admiral Elena Voss stood on the bridge of the ISS Prometheus, watching the tactical display fill with enemy contacts. There were hundreds of them, maybe more. The sensors could not count fast enough. An hour ago, the Sol defense fleet had been the pride of humanity. 312 warships, built over 40 years, armed with the best weapons human science could make. They had guarded the solar system since the first alien contact, ready for a day everyone hoped would never come. That day had come. The enemy was called the Threll Dominion, though nobody on Earth had known that name until 6 hours earlier, when their ships appeared at the edge of the system, like a wall of dark metal. There had been no warning shots, no demands, no attempt to talk. The Threll ships opened fire the moment they were in range, and human ships began to die. Elena watched the display update every few seconds, and every update was worse than the last. The Ares battle group, 40 ships strong, gone in a single volley. The Pacific Fleet, gone. The Lunar Defense Line, gone. Numbers dropped so fast that the computer struggled to keep the casualty count accurate. "Admiral, we're losing the Yamato group," said Lieutenant Chen, her voice tight with fear she was trying to hide. "They're not responding." "Keep trying," Elena said, though she already knew what silence meant. She had trained for war her whole life. She had studied every battle in human history, from ancient sieges to orbital combat simulations. Nothing had prepared her for this. The Threll ships moved with a kind of terrible grace, weaving between human formations, firing beams that cut through hull plating like it was paper. Human weapons barely scratched their shields. "Their shields are absorbing almost everything we throw at them," said Commander Torres, the weapons officer. "Even our fusion torpedoes aren't getting through." "Then we hit them with everything," Elena said. "All ships, fire at will. Target their weapons arrays." The order went out, and for a moment, hope flickered. A cluster of Threll ships took damage, their shields flaring bright blue, as human weapons found a weak point. Cheers broke out on the bridge. Then the Threll fleet adjusted. It happened almost too fast to see. The damaged ships fell back, and fresh ones took their place, firing beams so precise that they seemed to know exactly where every human ship's core systems were. The Prometheus shook as a beam grazed its outer hull. Alarms blared. "Shield integrity down to 60%, Chen reported. Elena gripped the edge of her console. Around Earth, the last defense line was crumbling. She could see it on the display, red icons winking out one by one, ships that carried thousands of sailors, gone in an instant. "Admiral," Torres said quietly, "at this rate, we won't last another 20 minutes." Elena did not answer right away. She was thinking of her daughter, safe on Earth, watching the sky through a telescope her father had given her. She was thinking of every city on the planet, every person who did not yet know that the fleet meant to protect them was dying above their heads. "Send a message to Earth Command," she said finally. "Tell them the fleet cannot hold. Tell them to activate planetary defenses and prepare for the worst." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. In 40 years of planning, no one had truly believed this moment would come. Humanity had built ships, trained soldiers, developed weapons, and told itself that if the day ever arrived, they would be ready. They were not ready. Nothing could have prepared them for an enemy this powerful. The Threll fleet pressed closer, tightening its formation around the remains of the human defense line. Elena watched as the Pacific Fleet's flagship, the ISS Washington, took a direct hit to its reactor core. The ship did not explode so much as it simply vanished in a flash of white light, leaving nothing behind but drifting debris. "That's Admiral Kessler's ship," Chen said, her voice breaking. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Kessler had been a mentor to her, a man who had taught her everything she knew about fleet tactics. He was gone now, along with 2,000 crew members, in less time than it took to say his name. "Steady," Elena said, though the word felt hollow. "We hold as long as we can." She thought of the training exercises she had run with this crew, the drills where they had practiced for scenarios far less severe than this one, always assuming that human technology would be enough to carry the day if the worst ever happened. Nobody had drilled for a scenario where the enemy's shields simply shrugged off everything humanity could throw at them. Nobody had planned for an enemy who could predict, with terrible accuracy, exactly where a human ship's weak points were before the battle had even begun. Around the bridge, junior officers worked their stations with the kind of grim focus that came from having no other choice. A young ensign named Rivera kept trying to raise the Yamato group on every frequency she could think of, refusing to give up even as the silence stretched longer and longer. Elena did not tell her to stop. Sometimes hope, even hope built on nothing, was the only thing keeping a crew functional in a moment like this. The Prometheus fired everything it had left: torpedoes, railgun rounds, point defense lasers, all aimed at the nearest Threll ship. For a moment, the enemy vessel's shields flickered, and Elena allowed herself to hope. Then the Threll ship fired back, a single beam that tore through the Prometheus's forward section. The bridge lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency power. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, Chen reported, her voice barely steady. "We're losing atmosphere." "Seal those sections," Elena ordered. "Get the crew to safe zones." Around the solar system, the pattern repeated on every human ship. Shields failing, hulls breaking, crews dying. In less than an hour, the fleet that had taken 40 years to build was reduced to burning wreckage. Elena looked at the tactical display one last time. Of the 312 ships that had formed the Sol defense fleet, fewer than 20 remained, and those were barely functional, their weapons spent, their shields gone. "All ships," she said into the comm, her voice steady despite everything. "This is Admiral Voss. It has been an honor to serve with you. Do what you can to protect the evacuation of Earth's orbital stations. That is our final duty." She expected no reply. She got none. The remaining ships were too busy fighting for their lives to spare words. Then something strange happened. The Threll fleet, which had been advancing steadily toward Earth, stopped. Not slowed. Stopped completely, as if every ship in the massive formation had received the same order at the same instant. "Admiral," Chen said, confusion cutting through her fear. "The enemy fleet has halted its advance. They're not firing anymore." Elena frowned, leaning over the display. It was true. The Threll ships hung motionless in space, their weapons silent, their formation unchanged. It made no sense. They had been winning. There was nothing stopping them from finishing the job. "Sensors, what's happening?" Elena asked. "Are they regrouping? Preparing something new?" "I don't know, Admiral," said the sensor officer, a young man named Patel who looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. "They're just sitting there. Wait, I'm picking up something else. A new contact. It's coming from beyond the system, from the direction of the Oort cloud." Elena's stomach tightened. A new contact could mean anything. More Threll ships, arriving to finish what the first wave had started, or something else entirely. "Identify it," she ordered. Patel's fingers flew across his console. "Admiral, I don't understand this. The contact is broadcasting an IFF signal. It's identifying itself as a human vessel." The bridge went quiet. "That's not possible," Torres said. "Every human ship is accounted for. The entire fleet was right here." "I know what the sensors say," Patel replied, his voice shaking slightly. "The signal is authentic. It matches old fleet command encryption protocols, the kind we haven't used in almost 15 years. But Admiral, the ship itself, it's massive. Bigger than anything in our records. Bigger than anything we've ever built." Elena stared at the display, watching a single new icon appear at the very edge of the system, far beyond where any human ship should have been. It was moving toward Earth, slow and steady, completely alone. "Open a channel," Elena said. "I want to know who is flying that ship, and I want to know why the Threll fleet just stopped in its tracks." While the comm officer worked, Elena took a moment to look around her bridge. Half the stations were dark, their operators either dead or moved to help with damage control elsewhere on the ship. The air smelled of burnt wiring and something worse underneath it, a smell she tried not to think about too closely. Chen was pale, her hands shaking slightly, even as she kept working. Torres had a cut above his eyebrow that no one had time to treat. These were her people, and she had led them into the worst hour in human military history. She thought about the briefings before the attack, the confident reports from Fleet Command's Science Division about shield capacity and weapon yield, numbers that had made everyone feel safe. She thought about her own daughter, 12 years old, who had asked her that morning over a video call whether the fleet would really be able to stop an alien invasion if one ever came. Elena had told her yes, without hesitation, because that was what a mother was supposed to say, and because she had genuinely believed it at the time. She did not believe it anymore. Belief had been burned away in the last hour, replaced by something colder and more practical. The need to keep as many people alive as possible, for as long as possible, and to make decisions with whatever information she actually had, rather than the information she wished she had. "Admiral, I have the channel open," the comm officer said. The comm officer worked quickly, and after a moment, static crackled through the bridge speakers. Then a voice came through, calm and measured, a voice that Elena did not recognize. "This is the ISS Ghostwalker, calling Fleet Command and any surviving vessels of the Sol Defense Fleet. We have been monitoring the engagement. We are inbound to assist." Elena exchanged a look with Chen. The Ghostwalker was not a name in any fleet registry either of them knew. "Ghostwalker, this is Admiral Voss, aboard the Prometheus," Elena said, keying her own comm. "Please explain your origin and your intentions. We have no record of your vessel." There was a pause before the reply came. "Admiral Voss, my name is Captain Marcus Reyes. My ship and its sister vessels were built in secret, outside official fleet command channels, over the last 12 years. We were meant to be humanity's last line of defense, should the primary fleet ever fall. That day appears to be today." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. A secret fleet, built without her knowledge, without the knowledge of anyone she had ever worked with. It sounded impossible, and yet the ship on her display was real, and the Threll fleet had stopped advancing the moment it arrived. "Why did the enemy halt?" Elena asked. "What do they know about your ship that we don't?" Another pause, longer this time. "That is a complicated question, Admiral, and I don't have a complete answer. What I can tell you is that the Threll Dominion has fought other species before. Species that build weapons in the open, weapons the Dominion can study and prepare for. We did not do that. Everything about the Ghostwalker and its sisters was designed and built without ever transmitting a single test signal, without ever showing our hand to any scanner that might be watching." "You're saying they don't know what you are," Elena said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "I'm saying they don't know what we can do," Reyes replied. "And that uncertainty is the only reason they've paused instead of finishing off the last of your fleet. Admiral, I need you to do something for me. I need you to send me the coordinates of every surviving human vessel, every escape pod, every station still holding position. We're going to need to coordinate carefully if we're going to turn this around." Elena looked at the wreckage scattered across her display, the remains of the fleet she had commanded just an hour ago. 20 ships left out of 312, thousands dead, and now, a stranger asking for coordinates, claiming to be humanity's hidden hope. She had no way to verify his story, no way to know if the Ghostwalker was truly as powerful as its sudden appearance suggested, or if this was some trick, some new tactic from an enemy that had already proven it could destroy everything humanity had built. But she also had no other options left. "Chen," Elena said quietly, "compile the coordinates. Send them to the Ghostwalker." "Admiral, are you sure?" Chen asked. "We don't know anything about this ship or this captain." Elena watched the frozen Threll fleet on her display, hundreds of enemy warships that had just annihilated humanity's entire defense force, now sitting motionless because of the arrival of a single unknown vessel. "I know that an hour ago, we had a plan, and it failed completely," Elena said. "I know that the enemy that just crushed us is now too cautious to attack, and I know that whatever secret the Ghostwalker carries, it's the only reason any of us are still breathing right now. Send the coordinates, Lieutenant. Let's see what Captain Reyes has been building all these years." Chen's hands moved across her console, transmitting the data. On the display, the icon representing the Ghostwalker continued its slow approach, still far from the battle, still alone against a fleet of hundreds. "Coordinates sent, Admiral," Chen confirmed. There was a moment of silence over the comm, then Reyes's voice returned, quieter now, almost solemn. "Thank you, Admiral Voss. Hold what position you can. Protect your crew. We'll handle the rest from here." "Captain Reyes," Elena said, "before you go, I want to know one thing. What exactly is the Ghostwalker capable of, that a fleet of hundreds of enemy warships would stop dead in their tracks just because you showed up?" The pause this time stretched long enough that Elena wondered if the connection had failed. When Reyes finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Admiral, the Threll Dominion has a very good intelligence network. They study every species they fight before they attack. They knew about your fleet, your weapons, your tactics, down to the smallest detail, and that's exactly why they crushed you in under an hour. But they don't know about us, because we made sure of that from the very first day construction began. Right now, somewhere in that enemy formation, there are commanders trying to figure out why a single unlisted human ship would fly toward them without fear. They're trying to decide if we're a bluff, or if we're something worse than anything they've faced before. And Admiral, I intend to make sure they never get a clear answer to that question, until it's far too late for them to do anything about it." The channel closed. Elena stood on the broken bridge of the Prometheus, surrounded by the wreckage of everything she had spent her career building, and watched a single ship drift closer to a fleet that had just proven itself unstoppable. For the first time since the attack began, she allowed herself a small, cautious flicker of hope. Chen looked up from her console, eyes wide. "Admiral, I'm counting 4 more contacts now. Each one matches the same unlisted signature as the Ghost Walker, though smaller. They're spread out, coming from different points around the system, but their vectors all converge on the same location, right where the Threll fleet is currently holding." "4 more ships," Torres said, disbelief plain in his voice. "Admiral, that's a fleet. An entire secret fleet. And nobody at Fleet Command knew a thing about it." Elena said nothing for a moment, watching the icons crawl slowly across her display. 12 hours ago, she would have called the idea of an unlisted 5-ship fleet, built entirely without her knowledge, or the knowledge of anyone she worked with, an impossible fantasy. Now she was watching it happen in real time, the proof laid out in cold sensor data that Patel had triple-checked before reporting. "Do we have any names for these other ships?" she asked. Patel worked his console for a moment. "Their IFF signals are coming through now. I'm reading the Quiet Storm, the Long Watch, the Iron Vigil, and the Last Word. None of those names appear anywhere in the Fleet Command Registry, Admiral. Not even in the classified archives I have clearance to search. Whoever built these ships made sure of that," Elena said quietly. She thought about the years leading up to this day, the budget reviews she had sat through, the endless meetings about fleet readiness and resource allocation. Somewhere, hidden inside all of that bureaucracy, someone had been quietly diverting resources toward a project so secret that even an admiral with her clearance level had never caught a hint of it. The scale of the deception was staggering, and yet, looking at the Threll fleet frozen in place on her display, she found she could not summon any anger about it. Only relief, and a great deal of curiosity about who had managed to pull off something so audacious. On the display, the Threll formation still had not moved, hundreds of warships sitting motionless, while their commanders tried to decide what to do about a threat they did not understand. Elena watched the 5 unlisted human ships continue their slow convergence, each one broadcasting the same calm confidence that Reyes had shown over the comm, as if 12 years of preparation had left no room for doubt about what came next. "Admiral," Chen said. "Orders?" Elena took a breath, steadying herself. The last hour had cost humanity almost everything it had built to defend itself, but for the first time since the attack began, she found herself looking at the tactical display and seeing something other than defeat. "Signal all surviving ships to hold position and prepare to support the Ghost Protocol fleet however we can," she said, "and somebody find me whoever authorized this project. When this is over, I want answers. But first, let's see if they can actually deliver on the promise they just made." Behind the Threll formation, sensors across the system were picking up something else now. More contacts, smaller than the Ghost Walker, approaching from different directions, all broadcasting the same old encryption signature, all converging on the same point in space. The hidden fleet was not just one ship. It was only beginning to arrive. 12 years before the Threll Dominion arrived at Seoul, a smaller meeting took place in a room deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, far from any official fleet command building. 6 people sat around a table. None of them held the rank of admiral. None of them were listed in any public record as working on defense projects. That was the entire point. Dr. Amara Okafor, then a young propulsion engineer, with a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions, was the one who had started it all. She had been part of the team that built the original Seoul defense fleet, and she had grown increasingly worried about one simple fact. Every weapon humanity built, every shield technology, every tactic, was tested in the open. Signals were broadcast, prototypes were flown in visible space. Reports were filed through networks that, while secure by human standards, had never been tested against an enemy capable of watching from a distance, with technology far beyond anything Earth possessed. "We are building a fortress with glass walls," she had told the small group that day, "and we don't even know if anyone is looking through them yet." The others in the room understood the risk immediately, because most of them had spent their careers studying exactly that danger. There was General Marcus Reyes, then a much younger officer, with a talent for unconventional strategy that made his superiors uneasy. There was Dr. Wen Liu, a scientist who had spent a decade studying the handful of alien artifacts humanity had recovered from a derelict probe found drifting near Jupiter, a probe that had clearly been watching Earth for a long time before it failed. There was Colonel Sarah Whitfield, an intelligence officer who had grown suspicious that Earth's official defense plans were not as secret as everyone assumed. And there were two others, quieter members whose names would remain unknown to almost everyone for the next 12 years. They called their project Ghost Protocol. The idea was simple to state and nearly impossible to execute. Build a second fleet, entirely separate from the official one, using technology and methods that had never been transmitted, tested, or recorded, anywhere that a watching enemy might intercept. No digital blueprints sent across networks. No test flights in visible orbit. No weapons trials that could be detected by long-range sensors. Everything would be built, tested, and hidden, using methods so old-fashioned they bordered on impossible for a modern military project. Physical blueprints stored in vaults, hand-carried data drives, testing facilities built inside solid rock formations where no signal could escape. It took 2 years just to convince enough people in positions of quiet power that the project was worth the enormous cost and risk. Reyes used old connections from his military career to secure funding through channels that were never labeled as defense spending. Whitfield used her intelligence background to make sure no official inquiry ever looked too closely at the strange pattern of resources disappearing into mountain facilities across 3 continents. Okafor and Liu began the real work, designing a ship unlike anything Earth had built before. The core idea behind the Ghostwalker's design came from an unlikely source. Liu's years of studying the derelict alien probe had taught her something crucial. The technology inside it relied heavily on predictable patterns. The probe's sensors had been extraordinarily good at recognizing signatures it already had on file, energy patterns it had been trained to detect. But it had struggled badly with anything truly unfamiliar. It was, in a strange way, not unlike a person trying to read a language they had never encountered. The shapes were there, but the meaning was missing. If their entire intelligence network is built on cataloging known patterns, Liu had explained to the team, then the most dangerous thing we could ever build is something with no pattern for them to catalog at all. That single insight shaped everything that followed. The Ghostwalker's reactor did not use the same fusion technology as the rest of the fleet. Instead, Liu and a small team spent 6 years developing a modified antimatter containment system, something so far outside standard human engineering that even most Fleet Command physicists would have called it impossible. Its weapons were not simple upgrades of existing railguns and lasers. They were built around a principle nobody outside the project had ever tested: focused gravity distortion, capable of bending space just enough to disrupt shield technology at a fundamental level, rather than simply overpowering it with raw energy. None of this was easy. There were failures, some of them nearly catastrophic. In the 4th year of the project, an early reactor test inside the Colorado facility went wrong, causing a containment breach that killed 2 engineers and very nearly exposed the entire operation when emergency response teams from the nearest town had to be quietly redirected and sworn to secrecy under threat of treason charges. Okafor carried the guilt of that day for the rest of her life, but she never stopped working, because she understood better than almost anyone what was at stake if the project failed. Reyes, meanwhile, was building something just as important as the ship itself: the crew who would fly it. He handpicked officers and specialists from across Fleet Command, people whose skill he trusted completely, and people whose lives had few connections that could be used to trace them back to a secret project. Some were given false postings, listed on official records as serving on ships that barely existed, doing jobs that generated almost no paperwork. Others simply vanished from public records entirely, their absence explained away through carefully constructed cover stories that Whitfield's intelligence contacts helped maintain for over a decade. By the 6th year, the first hull of the Ghostwalker was complete, built inside a hollowed-out mountain, in a location that remained one of the most closely guarded secrets in human history. It was massive, nearly twice the size of the largest ship in the official fleet, built not for speed or agility, but for one single purpose: to survive anything the Threll Dominion, or any other hostile power, could throw at it, while carrying weapons capable of striking back with devastating force. It was Reyes who insisted the project not stop at just one ship. "If we only build one," he argued during a tense meeting in the 9th year, "then we are gambling everything on a single point of failure. One lucky shot, one mechanical failure, one moment of bad luck, and Ghost Protocol dies with it. We need a fleet, even a small one, built the same way, hidden the same way, ready to move together." The argument was not an easy one to win. Building a second hidden ship meant doubling the risk of discovery, doubling the strain on the small circle of people who could be trusted with the secret, and doubling the already staggering cost that had to be hidden inside budgets and accounts that officially had nothing to do with military spending. Whitfield, usually the most cautious voice in the group, spent 2 full weeks resisting the idea before finally relenting. "If we're caught," she told Reyes privately after that meeting, "it won't just be our careers. It will look like treason, hiding weapons and warships from the government we serve. There will be no explanation good enough to satisfy a tribunal, no matter how good our intentions were." "I know," Reyes had answered. "But if we're not caught, and we're right about what's coming, then none of that will matter, because we'll be the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. I'd rather be tried as a traitor and be wrong than be remembered as the man who had a chance to save his species and didn't take it." Whitfield had not argued further after that. The others agreed, though it meant even greater cost and even greater risk of discovery. 4 additional ships were begun, smaller than the Ghostwalker but built using the same principles, the same secrecy, the same painstaking attention to leaving no trace that could be detected by an enemy's sensors. They were given names that meant nothing to anyone outside the project: the Quiet Storm, the Long Watch, the Iron Vigil, and the Last Word. Choosing the crews for the 4 new ships took nearly a year on its own. Reyes insisted on meeting every single candidate in person, often disguising the meetings as routine performance reviews or transfer interviews, so that nothing about the process would stand out in official records. He looked for a very particular combination of qualities: technical excellence, unquestionable loyalty, and perhaps most importantly, a willingness to disappear from the lives they had built without being able to explain why to the people who loved them. That last requirement proved to be the hardest cost of the entire project, one that never appeared in any budget report or engineering document. Captain Yuki Tanaka, eventually given command of the Quiet Storm, had to tell her aging parents that she was being posted to a remote listening station with no communication access for years at a time, a lie that weighed on her every single time she saw the hurt and confusion in their eyes during the rare supervised calls Whitfield's team allowed. Captain Elias Bardo, who would command the Last Word, missed his younger brother's wedding, his father's funeral, and the birth of his first niece, all while stationed less than 100 kilometers away in a hollowed-out mountain facility, unable to explain why he could not simply take a few days of leave. Reyes carried the weight of every one of those sacrifices personally, recording each one in a private journal that no one else was permitted to read, a quiet accounting of the human cost of a project that the rest of the world would never know had happened at all, regardless of how it ended. Training the crews for ships that officially did not exist presented its own unique challenges. Simulators had to be built from scratch, disconnected from any network, running on custom software that Liu's team wrote by hand, rather than adapting from existing fleet command systems, which might have left traces in shared code repositories. Weapons tests were conducted deep underground or in carefully shielded facilities where the energy signatures could not escape detection. Even the crew's daily lives had to be managed carefully, their movements tracked and controlled to avoid drawing attention from anyone who might wonder why so many skilled officers and engineers seemed to disappear for months at a time. Captain Marcus Reyes, now the commanding officer of the Ghostwalker itself, spent countless nights during those years wondering if any of it would matter, There were moments of doubt so severe that he considered ending the project entirely, worried that the enormous resources being poured into 5 secret ships might be better spent reinforcing the visible fleet instead. It was Okafor who talked him out of abandoning the project during one of the darkest periods, in the 10th year, after a funding crisis nearly forced them to shut everything down. "Think about what you're really asking," she told him. "You want to trust that the official fleet, built with methods the enemy has had years to study, will somehow be enough. I've seen the intelligence reports Whitfield brought back. I've seen what happened to other species that fought the Dominion using conventional means. They lost, Marcus. Every single one of them lost, and they lost fast. If we give up now, we're betting all of humanity on a fleet that has never been tested against an enemy this advanced. I'm not willing to make that bet. Are you?" Reyes was not willing to make that bet either, and so the project continued. By the 11th year, all 5 ships were complete, hidden in separate locations across the solar system, disguised as asteroid formations, abandoned mining stations, and in one case, a derelict research outpost that had officially been decommissioned decades earlier. By this point, the small founding team had grown into a quiet organization of nearly 400 people, spread across the world, engineers, technicians, medics, and support staff, who all understood, in varying degrees of detail, that they were part of something that officially did not exist. Whitfield had built an entire shadow bureaucracy just to keep the project funded and hidden, routing money through shell companies, false research grants, and long-dormant accounts left over from military programs that had been officially cancelled decades earlier. It was, in its own strange way, as impressive an achievement as the ships themselves, a testament to just how far a small group of determined people could go when they refused to accept that failure was acceptable. Whitfield's intelligence network had grown sophisticated enough to detect the first signs of unusual activity at the edge of the solar system, nearly 8 months before the Threll Dominion's fleet actually arrived, though nobody could have known for certain what those signs meant at the time. "Something is out there," she had told the team during their final meeting before the attack. "I don't know what, and I don't know when, but the patterns I'm seeing suggest a large force is moving through this region of space, and it's moving with purpose." Reyes had made the decision then to bring the Ghost Protocol fleet to its highest state of readiness, moving the ships into positions where they could respond quickly, without revealing themselves prematurely. It was a decision that would prove correct sooner than anyone expected. When the Threll Dominion's fleet finally appeared at the edge of Sol, 6 hours before the attack began, Ghost Protocol's 5 ships were already in position, hidden and waiting, watching the same tactical picture that Fleet Command was watching, but saying nothing, revealing nothing, because that had always been the plan. Let the official fleet be seen. Let the enemy study it, catalog it, prepare their response to it. And if the worst happened, if the visible fleet fell as everyone had feared it might, then Ghost Protocol would still be there, unknown and untested by the enemy, ready to strike when it mattered most. Watching the destruction of the Sol Defense Fleet unfold on his own tactical display, Reyes had felt something he had never expected to feel after 12 years of preparation, a terrible, hollow grief. He recognized ship names on that display. He had trained with some of those officers. He knew Admiral Kessler personally, had served under him early in his career, and watched now as the Washington vanished in a flash of white light that meant thousands of people he had once called colleagues were simply gone. "Captain," Okafor's voice had come through the internal comm, tight with barely controlled emotion. "We could intervene now. We're close enough." "Not yet," Reyes had replied, forcing his voice to stay steady, even as his hands gripped the edge of his console hard enough to hurt. "We move too early, and we throw away everything we built this fleet to accomplish. We wait until the moment matters most." It had taken every ounce of discipline he possessed to give that order, and every minute that followed felt like an eternity, watching ship after ship die on his display, while his own fleet remained hidden and silent. But he had trusted the plan, trusted the years of work that had gone into building it, and when the moment finally came, when the last handful of Sol Defense Fleet ships stood on the edge of complete annihilation, he gave the order to move. Now, as the Ghostwalker approached the battered remains of the human fleet, its 4 sister ships closing in from different directions across the system, Reyes finally understood what the years of sacrifice had been building toward. This was not simply a rescue mission. It was the first test of everything Ghost Protocol had promised to deliver, against an enemy that had no idea what was coming. Behind him, on the Ghostwalker's bridge, Okafor watched her own instruments, with an intensity that had not faded in 12 years. "Reactor at full capacity," she reported. "Gravity weapon systems charged and ready. Captain, we are as ready as we will ever be." Reyes looked at the tactical display, at the frozen Threll fleet still hesitating at the edge of what remained of Earth's defenses, uncertain of what this new, unlisted human vessel might represent. "Then let's show them exactly what they should have been afraid of," he said quietly. "All ships, converge on my position. It's time the Dominion learned that Earth had a secret worth keeping." Across the system, 4 more contacts began accelerating toward the battle, their engines finally revealing signatures that no Threll sensor had ever recorded before. The hidden fleet, built in silence over 12 long years, was moving into position for the fight that would decide everything. Far behind the front line of the Threll formation, aboard a support cruiser called the Devourer's Patience, a young weapons technician named Kret watched the same tactical feed as everyone else in the fleet, and felt a small, cold seed of doubt take root in his chest. Kret had joined the Dominion military 3 years earlier, straight out of training, and had absorbed every lesson his instructors taught him about the fleet's superiority, about the certainty of Dominion victory in any engagement against a lesser species. He had believed those lessons completely, the way young soldiers on the edge of their first real campaign often did. Watching the human fleet die an hour earlier had confirmed everything he had been taught, but now, staring at a single unlisted vessel that had brought 50 of the Dominion's finest warships to a halt, he found himself wondering, quietly, whether the lessons had been as complete as his instructors claimed. He kept the thought to himself, because Dominion culture did not reward soldiers who questioned doctrine out loud, but the seed had been planted, and it would not be easily removed. Aboard the Threll Dominion flagship Voranth's Judgment, Fleet Commander Skarn Voranth studied the strange new contact on his own tactical display with growing unease. In 300 years of conquest, he had never once hesitated in the middle of a battle he was clearly winning. Hesitation was not something the Dominion valued. It was, in fact, something that could end a commander's career, or his life, depending on how badly a mistake played out. And yet here he was, fleet held motionless, staring at a single unlisted vessel that had appeared from nowhere and was now drifting slowly toward the wreckage of the human fleet. "Report," Skarn said to his intelligence officer, a lean, pale-scaled Threll named Dessa, who had served with him for over a decade. "What is that ship?" "Unknown, Commander," Dessa admitted, her claws tapping rapidly against her console. "Its energy signature does not match anything in our records for this species, or for any species we have previously encountered. The reactor output alone is nearly triple what their other vessels produce. We have no data on its weapons, its shields, or its capabilities." "That's impossible," Skarn said. "We have been monitoring this system for the past 2 years. We cataloged every ship in their fleet, every weapon test, every training exercise. There should be nothing left for us not to know." "I am aware of that, Commander," Dessa said carefully. "And yet, there it is." Skarn stared at the display a moment longer, his mind running through the possibilities. The Dominion's entire strategy across 3 centuries of expansion had been built on patience and thorough preparation. Before ever engaging a new species in open war, Dominion scouts spent years, sometimes decades, quietly observing, cataloging every weapon, every tactic, every piece of technology that species developed. By the time the actual invasion began, Dominion fleets knew their enemies better than the enemies knew themselves. It was why the sole defense fleet, for all its size and all its courage, had fallen in less than an hour. The Dominion had known exactly where to strike, exactly which shield frequencies to counter, exactly which formations would collapse fastest under pressure. But this ship broke that pattern completely. It did not fit into any file, any observation, any report that 2 years of careful surveillance had produced. "Options," Skarn said. "We could destroy it before it gets closer," said Toth, his second in command, a broad-shouldered Threll, known throughout the fleet for his aggressive instincts. "Whatever it is, it's still just one ship. Overwhelm it with concentrated fire, before it can demonstrate whatever capability makes it worth this hesitation." "And if that hesitation is warranted," Dessa countered, "Commander, I would advise caution. In 3 previous campaigns, species that revealed hidden technology, mid-battle, inflicted disproportionate losses on our forces before we adapted. The Kethrani hit an orbital weapons platform that cost us 40 ships before we understood its function. If this human vessel represents something similar. The Kethrani had years to prepare that platform, and we still crushed them within a single campaign season, Toth interrupted. I say we finish what we started. Order the fleet to concentrate fire on the new contact, and eliminate it before it reaches optimal range. The bridge of the Voranth's judgment was a different kind of place than the human bridges it had just spent an hour destroying. Where human ships favored bright displays and constant chatter between officers, the Thrall preferred dim lighting and near silence. Every crew member trained from childhood to communicate through short, precise reports rather than open discussion. It was a culture built on discipline and hierarchy, on the certainty that came from 3 centuries of unbroken conquest across dozens of star systems. Skarn had grown up hearing stories of the great campaigns, the fall of the Kethrani, the surrender of the Vesson Collective, the quiet absorption of a dozen smaller species who had taken one look at Dominion fleets and chosen submission over annihilation. He had never lost a battle in 17 years of command. He had never even come close. That certainty was cracking now, faster than he wanted to admit even to himself. Skarn considered both arguments, weighing years of experience against the nagging discomfort building in his gut. He had commanded fleets across 17 major campaigns, and in every single one, the Dominion's advantage had come from knowing more than the enemy did. Right now, for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, he knew almost nothing about the threat in front of him. Compromise, he said finally. Toth, take the 3rd battle group and move to intercept. Test its capabilities directly, but do not commit the full fleet until we understand what we're facing. Dessa, continue analysis, and pull every scrap of data you can from its approach vector, its energy readings, anything at all that might tell us what this ship can do. Toth's battle group, 50 ships strong, more than enough to have overwhelmed the entire original human defense line on their own, broke formation and began accelerating toward the Ghostwalker. Aboard the Ghostwalker, Reyes watched the enemy formation split and move with a calm he did not entirely feel inside. 12 years of preparation had come down to this single moment, and there was no simulation, no test, no amount of planning that could fully replace the reality of facing an actual enemy fleet bearing down on his ship. 50 ships incoming, Okafor reported from her station. That's a significant portion of their remaining force. Nair had joined the project at 24, recruited straight out of a weapons engineering program after Reyes personally reviewed her thesis on theoretical applications of gravitational manipulation, a paper so far outside mainstream physics that most of her professors had considered it borderline crackpot science. She had spent 10 years since then living a life that felt, at times, like something out of a spy novel. False postings, sealed orders, entire years where her only human contact outside the project was with the same 40 or so people she trained alongside inside a mountain. She had missed birthdays, holidays, the ordinary texture of a normal life, all so that she could master a weapon system that, until this exact moment, had never once been fired at a living enemy. They're testing us, Reyes said, trying to figure out what we are before committing everything. He turned to his tactical officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Priya Nair, who had spent the last decade training exclusively in the Ghost Protocol's unique weapon systems. Nair? Status on the Gravity Lance Array? Fully charged, Captain, Nair replied. Ready on your order. Hold until they're within optimal range, Reyes said. I want this first strike to make a statement they can't misunderstand. On Earth, in cities across the planet, people who had spent the last hour glued to emergency broadcasts and hastily updated news feeds watched grainy telescope footage of the battle unfolding far above them. Governments had tried, in the chaos of the initial attack, to control the flow of information, worried about mass panic if the full scale of the fleet's destruction became public knowledge too quickly. That effort had failed almost immediately. Amateur astronomers, military family members with unofficial access to fragments of sensor data, and independent journalists had pieced together enough of the truth within the first 30 minutes that entire cities were already gripped by a kind of numb, disbelieving terror. Then word began to spread of the new ship, the strange unlisted vessel that had brought the alien advance to a halt. Nobody outside a small circle of people understood what the Ghostwalker truly was, but the fact that something had stopped the seemingly unstoppable enemy fleet, even for a few minutes, was enough to shift the mood in cities, from Tokyo to Sao Paulo to London, from despair toward a fragile, uncertain hope. In Colorado, not far from the mountain facility where the ship itself had been built in secret, a woman named Diane Okafor, Amara Okafor's older sister, who had spent 12 years believing her sibling worked for a private aerospace research firm, watched the news coverage with a strange, unplaceable feeling that she could not yet explain even to herself. The Threll battle group closed the distance with the same terrifying efficiency they had shown against the original human fleet, their formation tight and coordinated, weapons already charging for a coordinated volley, designed to overwhelm shields in a single devastating strike. 50,000 kilometers and closing, Nair reported. 40, 35. Steady, Reyes said, watching the display. At 28,000 kilometers, the Threll ships opened fire, a massed barrage of energy beams that had, less than 2 hours earlier, torn through the strongest shields humanity had ever built. Every officer on the Ghostwalker's bridge tensed as the wall of enemy fire raced toward them. The beams struck the Ghostwalker's shields and simply stopped. Not weakened, not reduced, stopped completely, as if the enemy weapons had struck an invisible wall of solid stone, rather than an energy barrier. The bridge fell silent for a heartbeat, as the crew absorbed what had just happened. "Shield integrity," Reyes said quietly. "100%, Captain," Okafor replied, disbelief evident in her voice, despite 12 years of designing the very system that had just performed exactly as intended. They didn't even dent it. Aboard the Voranth's Judgment, Skarn watched the same exchange with growing alarm. 50 ships had just fired everything they had at a single vessel, and the vessel's shields had not registered even a fraction of a percent of damage. "That's not possible," Toth said over the comm, his usual confidence cracking for the first time. "Commander, our weapons did nothing. Nothing at all." "Fire again," Skarn ordered, though even as he said it, he understood how badly the situation had already shifted. "Concentrate everything on a single point. Overload their shields through sheer volume if their frequency dispersal is too advanced for us to counter directly." The 50 Threll ships fired again, this time concentrating their combined firepower on a single section of the Ghostwalker's forward shields. The beams converged into a blinding pillar of energy that would have vaporized any of the original human fleet's vessels instantly. The Ghostwalker's shields flared brilliant blue but held. "Return fire," Reyes ordered, his voice hard now. "Gravity Lance, target their lead ship. Show them what we can do." Nair's fingers moved across her console with practiced precision. The Ghostwalker's primary weapon activated, and for a brief moment, nothing visible seemed to happen at all. There was no beam, no visible energy discharge, nothing that resembled a conventional weapon in any way. Then the lead Threll ship's shields simply collapsed, folding inward, as if the space around them had been twisted and released all at once. A heartbeat later, the ship itself crumpled, its hull deforming under forces that no conventional weapon should have been able to generate, before it broke apart entirely into scattered fragments of metal and debris. On the bridge, a young systems technician, named Owen Park, let out a short, disbelieving laugh, before catching himself and returning to his console, embarrassed. Nobody blamed him for it. 10 years of training in simulators, 10 years of theoretical models and small-scale tests, and here was the proof, playing out exactly as the engineers had promised it would, against a real enemy, in a real battle, where real lives hung on the outcome. "Direct hit," Nair reported, a note of fierce satisfaction cutting through her professional tone. Their shields didn't even register the attack as an energy weapon. It bypassed their entire defense system. Toth stared at his own readouts in disbelief, watching his lead ship break apart on the tactical display. In 20 years of Dominion service, he had never once seen a single weapon destroy a Threll capital ship in one strike. Threll warships were built with layered shields specifically designed to survive exactly this kind of catastrophic failure. Redundant systems stacked upon redundant systems, all meant to make total destruction from a single hit essentially impossible against any weapon technology the Dominion had ever encountered. "Report," he barked at his own tactical officer, though he already suspected there would be no good answer waiting for him. Aboard the Voranth's Judgment, Dessa stared at her sensor readings in stunned silence. "Commander, that weapon, it's not using energy in any conventional sense." It's manipulating gravity directly, at a scale our shield technology was never designed to counter. Our entire defensive doctrine assumes energy-based attacks. Skarn felt something he had not experienced in 3 centuries of Dominion service. Genuine fear. How many ships do we have in range of that weapon? All 50 in the battle group, Commander, Dessa said. If it can fire at that rate. The Ghostwalker's gravity lance fired again, before she could finish the sentence, and a second Threll ship crumpled and broke apart in the same terrible silence as the first. Then a third. The weapon, it seemed, did not require the long recharge cycles that conventional Dominion weapon systems needed between shots. Dessa's console lit up with a cascade of new readings, as the 4th ship in Toth's formation lost power entirely, its systems failing in ways that made no sense according to any Dominion engineering model. Commander, I'm seeing secondary effects now, not just structural failure. Their weapon appears to be disrupting internal systems, even on ships it doesn't directly strike, some kind of field effect at close range. This isn't a single-target weapon. It has a wider footprint than we assumed. That new information made Skarn's decision even easier, and even more urgent. Pull them back, Skarn ordered, his voice sharp with urgency now. Toth, disengage immediately. Full retreat to the main fleet position. But Toth, whose aggressive instincts had served him well across dozens of previous campaigns, hesitated for just a moment too long, unwilling to accept that 50 of the Dominion's finest warships could be losing to a single enemy vessel. That hesitation cost him dearly. The Ghostwalker's gravity lance fired twice more in rapid succession, destroying 2 more ships before Toth's battle group finally broke formation and began retreating in genuine disorder. On the Ghostwalker's bridge, the crew watched the enemy formation scatter, with a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. 5 ships destroyed, no damage taken in return. It was a result that would have seemed impossible only hours earlier, when the entire visible fleet had been crushed without inflicting any meaningful losses on the Dominion at all. Captain, Okafor said, the other Ghost Protocol ships are in position. The Quiet Storm, the Long Watch, the Iron Vigil, and the Last Word are all reporting ready status. Reyes nodded, watching the retreating Threll battle group on his display, and beyond it, the much larger main enemy fleet still holding position near the ruins of Earth's original defense line. They know something now that they didn't know an hour ago, Reyes said. They know we exist, and they know our weapons can hurt them badly. That changes everything about how this fight goes from here. He turned to his communications officer. Open a channel to Admiral Voss. I think it's time she knew exactly what her hidden fleet is capable of, and exactly what we're going to need from the survivors to finish this. As the channel opened, Reyes allowed himself a brief moment to consider the 12 years of sacrifice that had led to this point, the engineers who had died in early tests, the crews who had spent a decade training in secret, the countless nights of doubt that Okafor and the rest of the founding team had pushed through to reach this exact moment. It had all been building toward proving one simple truth to an enemy that thought it already knew everything about humanity. They had been wrong. He thought, too, of the conversation he'd had with Okafor the night before construction, on the Ghostwalker's hull had finally finished, 6 years into the project, when the enormity of what they were attempting had felt almost too heavy to carry. She had asked him then whether he truly believed they were doing the right thing, hiding weapons of this scale from the very government they had sworn to serve. I believe we're doing the only thing that gives humanity a real chance, he had told her. Everything else is just hoping the enemy is kinder than every piece of evidence suggests they'll be. Watching the Threll battle group scatter in retreat now, 5 of their ships reduced to drifting wreckage, Reyes allowed himself to believe, for the first time in 12 years, that the answer he had given her that night had been the right one. And now, with the first strike delivered, and the Dominion's main fleet still hesitating near Earth, the real battle was only just beginning. Admiral Elena Voss listened to Captain Reyes describe the destruction of 5 Threll warships, with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. On the Prometheus's damaged bridge, surrounded by flickering emergency lights and the quiet hum of failing systems, the news felt almost too good to be real after the devastation of the past hour. 5 ships, no damage taken, Reyes said over the comm. Admiral, I won't pretend this fight is over. The Dominion still has close to 300 vessels in that main formation, and we have 5, but they've just learned something they didn't know before, and now they have to decide how badly they want to test us again. What do you need from us? Elena asked, already calculating what remained of her shattered fleet. 20 ships, most barely functional, crews exhausted and grieving. It was not much to offer. Right now, mostly time, Reyes replied. Every minute the Dominion spends deciding what to do about us is a minute your surviving crews can use to fall back, regroup, and get wounded personnel to safety. Pull everything you have left behind the Ghost Protocol fleet. Let us hold the line while you consolidate. Elena did not hesitate. Understood, Captain. All surviving vessels, this is Admiral Voss. Fall back to defensive position behind the Ghost Protocol fleet. Prioritize getting wounded crew to medical stations. Move now. The withdrawal itself was not simple. Several of the surviving ships had lost most of their maneuvering thrusters and had to be towed by less damaged vessels, a slow and delicate process made harder by the debris field left behind from the earlier destruction. Medical teams worked frantically aboard every ship, treating burns, crush injuries, and the kind of deep psychological shock that came from watching colleagues die in the space of a single terrible hour. Aboard the Prometheus, a young medic named Diego Alvarez moved between wounded crew members in a makeshift triage area set up in what had once been the officers' mess, doing what he could with supplies that were already running dangerously low. Elena made herself walk through that triage area before returning to the bridge, something Kessler had once told her every commander owed their crew. The willingness to look directly at the cost of their decisions, rather than hiding from it behind a tactical display. She saw Ensign Rivera, the young officer who had refused to stop trying to raise the Yamato group, sitting against a bulkhead with her arm in a makeshift sling, tears finally falling now that the immediate crisis had passed enough to allow for them. Elena knelt beside her for a moment, said nothing, and simply rested a hand on her shoulder before moving on. There was no speech that would have helped more than that small, quiet acknowledgement. As the remaining human ships began their slow, painful withdrawal, Elena watched the tactical display with a strange, unfamiliar feeling rising in her chest. For the first hour of this battle, she had felt nothing but helplessness, watching ship after ship die, while there was nothing she could do to stop it. Now, for the first time, she was watching 5 ships hold an entire enemy fleet at bay, and something in her began to believe, cautiously, that this war might not be over yet. Aboard the Voranth's Judgment, Skarn Voranth faced a decision that no Dominion commander in 3 centuries had ever needed to make. His scouts and intelligence networks had failed him completely. The species he had spent 2 years studying, the fleet he had crushed in under an hour, had somehow produced a weapon and a set of ships that matched nothing in Dominion records, nothing in 300 years of catalogued conquest across dozens of species. Options, he said again to his command staff, though this time the word carried none of the confidence it had held only an hour earlier. We still outnumber them 50-1, Toth said, though his usual aggressive certainty had given way to something more cautious. Even if their weapons are dangerous, sheer numbers should eventually overwhelm them. Should, Dessa repeated pointedly. Commander, I've been running projections based on the engagement data from the last battle group's encounter. If the gravity lance weapon can fire at the rate we observed, and if all 5 of these new vessels are equipped with similar systems, a full fleet engagement could cost us between 60 and 90 ships before we destroy even one of theirs, assuming their shields hold at the same strength we observed. The number hung in the air of the bridge like a physical weight. 90 ships was more than the Dominion had lost in the last 3 campaigns combined. There's something else, Commander, Dessa continued. I've cross-referenced the weapon signature with our historical archives. It's a partial match, not perfect, but close enough to be significant, to technology recovered from a Dominion scout probe that went dark near this system, roughly 15 years ago. We assumed it malfunctioned. Given what we're seeing now, I believe it's possible the humans recovered that probe and reverse-engineered elements of its containment technology. Skarn absorbed this information slowly. 15 years. If the humans had begun developing this technology that long ago, it meant this was not some desperate, hastily improvised response to the day's attack. It meant a plan, a long and carefully hidden plan, executed with a patience and discipline that the Dominion's own intelligence assessments had completely failed to predict. He thought back to the reports his predecessors had filed on other species the Dominion had conquered over the centuries, reports that always emphasized the same broad patterns: aggressive but disorganized resistance, brave individual acts that meant little against overwhelming coordinated force, societies that simply could not match centuries of accumulated Dominion military doctrine. He had read 100 such reports during his officer training, and every one of them had painted a picture of inevitable Dominion victory against any species still building its first interstellar fleet. None of those reports had prepared him for an enemy capable of hiding an entire second fleet for over a decade, waiting patiently for the exact moment when it would matter most. It was, he realized with a discomfort that bordered on genuine dread, a kind of patience that the Dominion itself valued highly in its own military culture, and seeing it turned against them for the first time in 3 centuries was deeply unsettling. "I underestimated them," Skarn said quietly, more to himself than to his staff. "Every report I received on this species emphasized their aggression, their impatience, their tendency toward open displays of strength. Nothing suggested they were capable of this kind of long-term, silent preparation." "What are your orders, Commander?" Toth asked, and for the first time, there was no eagerness in his voice, only genuine uncertainty about what path forward made sense. Skarn considered the tactical display for a long moment, weighing 3 centuries of Dominion doctrine against the uncomfortable reality in front of him. The Dominion's entire military philosophy was built on the principle of overwhelming, well-informed force, applied only after thorough preparation had eliminated as much uncertainty as possible. That principle had just been proven catastrophically insufficient. "We commit the full fleet," he said finally, "but not in a single reckless charge. We approach in staggered waves, each wave gathering more data on their capabilities before the next wave engages. If their weapon has any limitation at all, any recharge cycle, any maximum range, any weakness in tracking multiple simultaneous targets, we will find it through controlled engagement, rather than blind aggression." It was, in truth, the most cautious plan the Dominion had used in a first-contact war in living memory, and it reflected just how thoroughly the Ghostwalker's first strike had shaken Skarn's confidence. The first wave, 80 ships strong, began advancing toward the 5 Ghost Protocol vessels an hour later. Aboard the Ghostwalker, Reyes watched the new formation approach with grim focus. "They've learned caution," he noted to Okafor. "Staggered approach, spread formation, probably trying to figure out our maximum firing rate and effective range before committing everything." "Smart," Okafor admitted. "It's what I would do in their position." "Doesn't matter how smart they are, if we can adapt faster than they can learn," Reyes said. He opened a channel to the other 4 Ghost Protocol ships.
"All vessels, this is Reyes. They're going to try to draw out our weapon patterns through controlled engagement. I want each ship to vary its firing rhythm and targeting priority. Don't give them a clean pattern to analyze.
Coordinate through the tactical network, but keep your individual approach unpredictable." Captain Amara Okonkwo Ibrahim, commanding the Iron Vigil, acknowledged first. "Understood. We'll mix conventional weapons with the gravity lance to muddy their data." "Same here," added Captain David Torres of the Long Watch, no relation to the weapons officer aboard the Prometheus, a coincidence that had become something of a running joke among the small Ghost Protocol crews over the years. "If they're trying to build a model of our capabilities, let's make sure that model is wrong." The 80-ship Threll formation closed to engagement range, and this time, instead of a single massed volley, they attacked in smaller, staggered groups, each testing a different angle, a different range, a different combination of weapons against the 5 human ships. The battle that followed was unlike anything either side had experienced. The Ghost Protocol fleet, though vastly outnumbered, used their superior individual firepower and shield strength to methodically destroy Threll ships as they came within range, while constantly shifting their tactics to avoid revealing any exploitable pattern. Threll ships that pressed too aggressively were destroyed by gravity lance strikes. Ships that hung back, trying only to gather data, found themselves targeted by the Ghost Protocol fleet's conventional weapons, forcing them to either engage fully or retreat. Aboard the Iron Vigil, Captain Okonkwo Ibrahim moved through the engagement with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed this exact kind of chaotic, multi-front battle hundreds of times in simulation. She had spent 9 years training her crew to treat unpredictability as a tool rather than a threat, running drills where enemy formations behaved erratically on purpose, forcing her officers to adapt on the fly, rather than relying on fixed tactical templates. That training paid off now, as her tactical officer called out shifting target priorities every few seconds, keeping the Threll analysts guessing at a pattern that never fully solidified. They're trying to flank Tanaka's position, her tactical officer reported. Group of 8, breaking off to approach the quiet storm from a wide angle. Then we cut them off, Okonkwo Ibrahim said, already adjusting course. Helm, intercept vector, best speed. 20 minutes into the engagement, the Threll had lost 23 ships. The Ghost Protocol fleet had lost none, though the quiet storm had taken significant shield damage after being targeted by a concentrated strike from 12 ships simultaneously. Shields at 40%, reported Captain Yuki Tanaka aboard the quiet storm, her voice tight but controlled. We can hold, but I'd appreciate some support if anyone can spare it. On our way, Okonkwo Ibrahim replied, and the Iron Vigil peeled away from its position to reinforce the quiet storm, its own gravity lance, already charging. Watching the battle unfold from the Prometheus, now positioned safely behind the Ghost Protocol formation, Elena Voss found herself struck by something she had not expected to feel again after the devastation of the fleet's destruction: pride. These 5 ships, built in complete secrecy over 12 years by people she had never met, fighting with a coordination and skill that matched or exceeded anything the official fleet had ever demonstrated in training exercises. Admiral, Chen said from her station, Fleet Command is requesting an update. They want to know if we should begin planetary evacuation protocols. Elena considered the question carefully, watching the tactical display where the Ghost Protocol fleet continued to hold against overwhelming numbers. Tell them to hold evacuation protocols for now, she said. I want to see how this engagement develops before we make that call. If Captain Reyes's fleet can keep holding the line like this, evacuation might not be necessary at all. It was not an easy call to make. Evacuation protocols, once triggered, would send millions of people into shelters and underground facilities across the planet, a process that carried its own risks of panic, injury, and disruption on a massive scale. Delaying that order meant gambling that the Ghost Protocol fleet's early success would hold, that 5 ships really could continue to outperform an enemy formation many times their size. But triggering it too early, only to stand down an hour later, would damage public trust in Fleet Command's judgment, at a moment when that trust mattered more than almost anything else. Elena had learned long ago that command was rarely about finding a choice with no downside. It was about weighing which downside was easier to live with. Understood, Admiral, Chen said, relaying the order. She hesitated, then added quietly, For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. Elena allowed herself the ghost of a smile. Ask me again in an hour, Lieutenant. Aboard the Voranth's Judgment, Skarn watched his casualty numbers climb, with a growing sense of dread that he was careful not to let show in front of his command staff. 23 ships lost in 20 minutes, with no clear pattern in the human fleet's tactics that his analysts could exploit. Commander, Dessa said, at this rate of loss, continuing the engagement will cost us the majority of the first wave, before we gather enough data to develop an effective counter-strategy. I'm aware of the numbers, Dessa, Skarn said, his patience wearing thin. What I need from you is a solution, not a restatement of the problem. Around the bridge, other officers had gone quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. In 3 centuries of Dominion history, no fleet commander had ever needed to consider civilian targeting as anything other than a routine option, one line item among many, in a long checklist of conquest procedures. Skarn had used the tactic himself twice before, in earlier campaigns against far weaker species, and had never once questioned its effectiveness. Effectiveness had never been the issue. It was something else now, something Skarn could not quite name, that made the words feel heavier in his mouth than they ever had before. Dessa hesitated before responding, choosing her words carefully. Commander, there may be one option worth considering. Our long-range sensors detected a significant concentration of what appears to be civilian infrastructure on the human homeworld itself: population centers, industrial facilities, orbital habitats. If we redirect a portion of our fleet to threaten the planet directly, it's possible the humans would be forced to divide their 5 vessels to protect multiple targets simultaneously, reducing the concentrated firepower they're currently using against our attacking waves. Skarn considered this suggestion with a mixture of professional calculation and something that felt uncomfortably close to reluctance. In 3 centuries of Dominion conquest, targeting civilian populations to force tactical advantages was not an uncommon strategy, but something about facing an enemy this capable made him hesitate. a small nagging concern that any species capable of building what the Ghost Protocol fleet represented might respond to such a threat with something far worse than simple military resistance. But, with his casualties mounting, and no other clear path to victory presenting itself, Skarn found the calculation increasingly difficult to argue against. "Order the second wave to redirect toward the planet's orbital defense grid," he said finally, the words tasting bitter even as he spoke them. "If we can force even one of their ships to split off in defense of civilian targets, it may be enough to shift the balance back in our favor." The order went out, and across the system, a new wave of Thrall ships began altering course, no longer aimed at the Ghost Protocol fleet directly, but instead angling toward Earth itself, toward the orbital stations and defense platforms that housed millions of civilians. Aboard the Ghostwalker, Nair was the first to notice the shift. "Captain, we have a problem. Second wave, 40 ships, changing vector. They're not coming toward us anymore." On the bridge of the Ghostwalker, the mood shifted instantly from cautious confidence to sharp, focused alarm. Every officer understood what an attack on the orbital stations would mean, not just in terms of military assets lost, but in terms of the millions of civilian lives housed in the habitats and research platforms that ringed the planet. This was the scenario the Ghost Protocol planning team had feared most during 12 years of preparation. The moment where the enemy would try to force an impossible choice by threatening the one thing no commander could ignore. Reyes felt his stomach drop as he checked the new trajectory data. "They're going for the planet." Okafor's face went pale as she confirmed the analysis. "Captain, at their current speed, they'll be in range of Earth's orbital defense grid in 18 minutes. The grid wasn't designed to withstand a sustained attack of that size, not after the primary fleet's losses left it undermanned." Reyes stared at the display, understanding immediately what Skarn Voranth had understood before him. The Dominion had found the one pressure point the Ghost Protocol fleet could not simply outfight. 5 ships, however powerful, could not be in 2 places at once, and if even a fraction of that 40-ship wave reached Earth's orbital stations, the human cost would be catastrophic. "All Ghost Protocol vessels," Reyes said, his voice hard with the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on him. "We have a decision to make, and we have to make it fast." On the Ghostwalker's bridge, Reyes stared at the tactical display, watching 40 Thrall ships accelerate toward Earth, while the remaining 40 of the first wave continued pressing against his own fleet. Splitting his ships meant weakening both fronts. Staying together meant leaving Earth's orbital stations to face an overwhelming attack alone. "Captain," Okafor said quietly, "we planned for this. Not this exact scenario, but we planned for the possibility that they would try to divide our forces." Reyes nodded slowly, memory catching up with the pressure of the moment. 12 years of preparation had included exactly this kind of contingency, discussed in long planning sessions back when the entire project existed only as blueprints and theoretical models. "The interceptor pattern," he said. "The interceptor pattern," Okafor confirmed. Reyes opened a channel to the rest of the Ghost Protocol fleet. "All ships, listen carefully. We're splitting into 2 groups. Iron Vigil and Long Watch. You're with me. We break off and intercept the wave heading for Earth. Quiet Storm and Last Word, you hold position here and keep pressure on the remaining first wave. I know that's asking you to hold against 40 ships with only 2, but you have the advantage of our shield technology and the gravity lance. Make them pay for every meter of ground they try to take." Captain Tanaka aboard the Quiet Storm responded immediately, her voice steady despite the daunting math of the assignment. "Understood, Captain. We'll hold." Captain Elias Bardo aboard the Last Word added, "Go save the planet. We've got this." There was no time for a longer conversation, no time to acknowledge the enormity of what he was asking 2 ships to do against 40, but Reyes made himself say one more thing before closing the channel. "Whatever happens, what you're about to do matters more than almost anything else that's happened today. Hold as long as you can, and if you need to fall back, fall back. Nobody on this fleet is asking you to throw your ships away for nothing." "Copy that, Captain," Tanaka replied. "We didn't spend 10 years training for this to fold at the first real test." Reyes felt a surge of gratitude for the crews who had trained alongside him for over a decade, people who understood exactly what was being asked of them and did not hesitate to answer. "Ghostwalker, Iron Vigil, Long Watch, form up on my position. We're going to intercept that second wave before it reaches the orbital grid." The three ships broke away from the main engagement, their engines flaring as they accelerated on a course to cut off the 40-ship Threll wave before it could reach Earth. It was a race against time and distance, and the math was not comfortable. The Threll ships had an 18-minute head start advantage in position, though their overall approach speed gave Reyes's group a narrow window to catch them before they reached weapons range of the orbital stations. Aboard the Prometheus, Elena Voss watched the developing situation with growing alarm. "Chen, get me a direct line to the orbital defense grid commander. I want every remaining platform at full readiness, and I want civilian evacuation of the most exposed stations started immediately, quietly, without causing a citywide panic if we can manage it." "On it, Admiral," Chen replied, already working her console. "Torres," Elena continued, "what condition are our surviving ships in? Can any of them provide additional support to the orbital grid?" Torres checked his readouts grimly. "Most of what's left is barely holding together, Admiral. Maybe 6 ships could contribute meaningful firepower, and even that's optimistic, given our damage reports." Elena made her decision quickly. "Send those 6. Every gun we can bring to bear matters right now. The rest hold position and continue emergency repairs." As the order went out, Elena watched the tactical display, where Reyes's 3-ship group raced to intercept the Threll wave, while her own battered remnant fleet moved to reinforce Earth's orbital defenses. It felt, for a brief moment, like watching 2 desperate gambles play out simultaneously, with the fate of millions of lives hanging on both. Aboard the Voranth's Judgment, Skarn watched the same situation unfold with a very different set of calculations running through his mind. "Status on the second wave's approach?" 14 minutes to orbital defense grid range, Dessa reported. "The human vessels attempting to intercept will arrive approximately 6 minutes before our forces reach the grid, based on current velocity projections." "Then order the second wave to increase speed. Accept the risk of arriving with less coordinated formation," Skarn said. "I want them past the interception point before those 3 ships can establish an effective blocking position." The order rippled through the Threll formation, and the 40 ships surged forward, their formation loosening slightly as individual vessels pushed their engines past standard operational limits in the race to reach Earth, before Reyes's group could intercept them. It became, in the final minutes, a desperate contest of speed and positioning. Reyes watched the tactical display with an intensity that made his jaw ache from clenching it, calculating and recalculating the intercept angle as both fleets adjusted their courses. "We're not going to make a clean intercept," Okafor said, her voice tense. "At best, we'll cross their path with only a partial engagement window, before they're past us and into weapons range of the orbital grid." "Then we make that window count," Reyes said. "Nair, I want the gravity lance charged and ready, the instant we're in range. We're not going to get a second chance to thin their numbers before they reach the grid." The Ghostwalker, Iron Vigil, and Long Watch reached their intercept position, just as the leading edge of the Threll wave crossed into range. Reyes gave the order, and all 3 ships opened fire simultaneously, their combined gravity lance strikes tearing through the front ranks of the enemy formation. 6 ships were destroyed in the first exchange, their shields collapsing under attacks that Dominion technology still had no effective counter for. But 34 ships remained, and they continued their push toward Earth, accepting the losses as an acceptable cost to reach their objective. Reyes's group fired again, destroying 4 more, but the remaining Threll ships were now passing beyond effective engagement range, their combined speed simply outpacing the human ship's ability to maintain a firing solution. "They're breaking past us," Okafor reported, frustration evident in her voice. 30 ships, still on course for the orbital grid. Reyes felt the weight of that number settle over him. 30 ships, more than enough to inflict devastating casualties on Earth's undermanned defenses, and his own group could not catch them in time. "Orbital defense grid," he said, opening a channel. "This is Captain Reyes, aboard the Ghostwalker. You have 30 hostile vessels inbound, ETA 6 minutes. We were unable to fully intercept. Do everything you can to hold. We're turning to pursue, but we won't reach you before contact." The response came from Commodore James Okoye, commanding the orbital defense grid, his voice steady despite the grim news. "Understood, Captain. We'll do what we can. Every platform is at full readiness, and we've got 6 additional ships from the Sol Defense Fleet remnants inbound as well." Aboard the largest of the orbital stations, a habitat called Meridian Station, that housed almost 60,000 civilians alongside its military garrison. Commodore Okoye watched the incoming Threll formation on his own display, with a grim determination that he tried to project to the frightened staff around him. He had spent the last 20 minutes personally overseeing the evacuation of non-essential personnel to the station's reinforced core, a process that was still only half finished when the first enemy ships came into weapons range. "All platforms, hold fire until they're within optimal engagement distance," Okoye ordered, his voice carrying over every channel on the station. "Conserve ammunition. We don't get a second chance to make these shots count." As the 30 Threll ships closed on Earth's orbital defenses, the battle that followed was fierce and costly on both sides. The orbital platforms, though weakened by the earlier destruction of the primary fleet, fought with a desperation born of defending their own homes rather than distant space, and the 6 surviving human ships that Elena had dispatched added their firepower to the defense, buying precious minutes even as they took heavy damage. It was not enough on its own. 3 orbital platforms were destroyed in the first minutes of the engagement, and casualties among the platform crews began mounting rapidly. But the delay had cost the Threll fleet, the minutes spent fighting through determined resistance, rather than sweeping through unopposed, gave Reyes's group just enough time to close the distance. The Ghostwalker, Iron Vigil, and Long Watch arrived at the edge of the battle 6 minutes after the engagement began, and this time, there was no need for a careful intercept calculation. The 3 ships simply opened fire on the Threll formation from behind, catching them in a crossfire between the orbital defenses ahead and the gravity lance strikes coming from their rear. The effect was immediate and devastating. Caught between 2 fronts, unable to retreat without abandoning their attack entirely, the 30-ship Threll formation began to collapse under the combined pressure. Ship after ship fell to gravity lance strikes, their shields useless against a weapon their technology had never been designed to counter. Aboard the Voranth's Judgment, Skarn watched the destruction of his second wave, with a growing certainty that this campaign, one that had begun with such overwhelming and decisive success, was slipping away from him entirely. "Commander," Dessa said quietly, "second wave has lost 22 ships. Remaining 8 are attempting retreat, but the human interceptor group has cut off their withdrawal vector." "And the first wave?" Skarn asked, though he already suspected the answer would bring no comfort. "First wave has lost 31 of 80 ships, engaging the remaining 2 Ghost Protocol vessels," Dessa reported. "The 2 ships defending that position have sustained damage, but remain fully operational." Aboard the Devourer's Patience, far behind the main engagement, Kret watched the retreat order propagate through the fleet's communication network, with a strange mixture of relief and unease. Relief, because it meant his own ship would not be committed to a battle that seemed to be going badly wrong for the Dominion. Unease, because a retreat order this early in a campaign was something he had never witnessed in 3 years of service, something that broke every pattern he had been trained to expect from Dominion leadership. He found himself wondering, not for the first time that day, just how much of what he had been taught about Dominion invincibility had been true, and how much had simply never been tested against an enemy capable of fighting back this effectively. Skarn stood in silence for a long moment, absorbing the full scope of the disaster unfolding across his fleet. 53 ships lost in total, against a combined enemy force of only 5 vessels, in an engagement that had begun with the Dominion holding what should have been an insurmountable numerical advantage. "Commander," Toth said, his earlier aggressive confidence completely gone now, replaced by something closer to genuine alarm. "If this pattern continues, we could lose the majority of our remaining fleet before we ever reach a decisive outcome." Skarn understood the truth of that statement all too well. 3 centuries of Dominion doctrine had never encountered an enemy capable of this kind of technological surprise, this level of hidden preparation. Every previous conquest had been built on thorough intelligence gathering that eliminated uncertainty before battle ever began. Here, uncertainty had been the humans' greatest weapon, and it had cost the Dominion more in a single engagement than most entire campaigns across the galaxy. "Order full withdrawal," Skarn said finally, the words heavy with the weight of an unprecedented decision. In 300 years, no Dominion fleet commander had ever ordered a retreat from a species they had already begun conquering. "All remaining ships, disengage and regroup at the system's edge. We will reassess before committing to further action." The order went out across what remained of the Threll fleet, and slowly, Reluctantly, the massive formation that had crushed Earth's original defense in under an hour began pulling back, leaving the battered but victorious Ghost Protocol fleet holding the field. Aboard the Prometheus, Elena Voss watched the Threll fleet's retreat with an emotion so overwhelming that she found herself unable to speak for several long moments. Chen finally broke the silence.
Admiral, they're retreating! The Dominion fleet is retreating!
Elena nodded slowly, still processing the reversal of fortune that had unfolded over the past several hours. From the complete destruction of Earth's primary defense fleet to a hard-won victory that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. "Get me Captain Reyes," she said quietly. The channel opened, and Reyes's voice came through, tired but steady. "Admiral Voss, I think we bought ourselves some time." "Time. And a great deal more than that, Captain," Elena replied. "You and your people just did something I would have called impossible this morning." "We had 12 years to prepare for exactly this moment," Reyes said. "It still cost us. We lost good people today, even with everything we built. The Dominion will be back, Admiral, probably with a larger, more prepared force, and they'll have learned from today's engagement just as we have." Elena looked out at the wreckage scattered across the system, the remains of the fleet she had commanded that morning, and beyond it, the 5 battered but victorious ships of a project she had known nothing about until a few hours earlier. "Then we'll be ready for them too," she said. "Captain Reyes, I think it's time Fleet Command learned exactly what Ghost Protocol accomplished today, and I think it's time we started building more ships like yours, in the open this time, with everything we've learned from your example." "I'd like that, Admiral," Reyes said. "Humanity's always been at its best when we stop hiding what we're capable of and start building on it together." As the last of the Threll fleet withdrew beyond the edge of the solar system, and rescue operations began in earnest across the wreckage of the battle, word of what had happened began to spread. Not just among Fleet Command and the surviving crews, but eventually, to every person on Earth who had spent the day believing their world's defenses had been utterly destroyed. They learned that in the darkest hour of humanity's first true war, when everything visible and known had failed completely, a hidden fleet, built in silence and sacrifice, had stepped forward exactly when it was needed most. They learned the names of the ships that had turned the tide: the Ghostwalker, the Quiet Storm, the Long Watch, the Iron Vigil, and the Last Word. On the ground, in cities across the planet, people who had spent the day in fear finally began to emerge from shelters and safe rooms as the news of the Dominion retreat spread. In Colorado, Diane Okafor received a phone call late that evening from a number she did not recognize, and heard her sister's voice for the first time in what felt like months, tired but alive, unable to explain much of what had happened but promising, for the first time in 12 years, that she would try to tell her the whole story soon. It was a small moment, one of millions playing out across the planet that night, as families reconnected and communities began the long process of grieving those who had been lost, while also processing the strange, unexpected relief of having survived a day that had seemed, only hours earlier, like it might be humanity's last. And far beyond the edge of the solar system, aboard the retreating Voranth's Judgment, Fleet Commander Skarn Voranth filed a report unlike any he had submitted in 3 centuries of service, a report warning every other Dominion commander that the species called humanity was far more dangerous than any intelligence assessment had ever suggested, a warning that would echo through Dominion command structures for years to come. Humanity had lost its fleet in a single hour, but in the hours that followed, it had shown the galaxy something far more important than the strength of its ships. It had shown the patience to prepare in silence for 12 long years, the discipline to wait for exactly the right moment to act, and the resolve to keep fighting, even when everything seemed lost. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the Dominion ships had appeared at the edge of Sol, humanity understood exactly what it was capable of when pushed to its absolute limit, and that understanding would shape everything that came next.